I am a human being and I killed human beings.
Before I knew it, I'd fired 4 shots at the door. I kept on shouting for Eva to phone the police.
Tests are underway to determine if a serial killer is on the loose in Centurion, Pretoria.
The dead won't bother you. It's the living you got to worry about.
Good evening, everybody. Once again, you're joining us on Profiler Africa, bringing you more great true crime stories from around the continent of Africa and beyond. Tonight, we are setting sail across the Northern Hemisphere to bring you our very first international guest, somebody who brings heavyweight credibility to the field of forensic psychology. Her name is Dr. Helinä Häkkänen. She's from Finland, and she will be speaking to us throughout the show. Helinä's work has shaped the field of criminal profiling in Scandinavia and beyond. She's recently served as an expert witness for the prosecution in a war crimes case linked to Liberia, a landmark trial that has made waves across the international legal world. She's also the author of a powerful new book that lifts the veil on what real profiling looks like. Not the TV version, but the actual science-based methods used in complex investigations. Of course, we're also joined by my partner in arms, Jared Labuskachny, the former head of forensic psychology at the South African Police Service, and he is, of course, our profiler. Okay, so in typical style, because you guys, I'm sure, are going to just jump into a wonderful conversation. I am going to hand over to you, Gerard, and let you kind of take it from here. And then I will monitor the chat. I'd like to invite everyone to, of course, join in with the chat. Please do subscribe to Profiler Africa for top-tier true crime content from a profiler's perspective. Become a channel member to access exclusive content and help build an independent media voice that tells our stories, and support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/Profiler Africa. Hit that like button, join the live chat. I'll be monitoring your questions and dropping them in as the discussion goes. So Jared, over to you.
Thanks very much, and welcome everybody, and thanks Helinä for agreeing to do this. It's really, really great to have someone with your caliber, and as we'll get into it, people will see why I say that.
Thank you for inviting me. It's really, really nice to see you again after so many years.
Great. And as people can probably tell, we have a bit of delay, so we're going to have some pauses that sound a little bit awkward, but that's just as the sound travels across the globe. Now, I was actually wondering when it was that we first met, and I think it was probably like 2002, 2003 in Lithuania at a conference, if I'm not mistaken, unless you can recall an earlier time that we met than that.
No, probably not, because I started my career in criminal psychology back in 2001, so that's probably very likely that you're correct. I can't remember myself, but I do trust your memory. So,
and one thing I do remember about the trip is we were after one of the functions in the old town of Vilnius, and you were posing next to a very elaborate, I think it was like a stretched limousine, and you were having, someone taking pictures of you standing next to this fancy car. And I remember pointing out to you that it's actually a car that was an advert for a local brothel.
I remember that now when you tell me. But you know me. I like to have fun. I like to do pictures. I like to do stuff like that. I haven't changed a bit. Just gotten worse.
Now, I mean, I often like to start off asking guests how they got into the field that they're currently in, or into the career that they ended up in, because I think very few of us plan this kind of a career. I know I didn't necessarily think this is what I was going to be doing when I started to go into the field of psychology. So how did you, when did you first realize this is what you want to do, and how did you end up in this world? Because it's not a world where there's hundreds of jobs. You almost sometimes have to create your own space.
Well, I did my master's degree on and master thesis back in Helsinki, and I finished master's in 1996. And I was doing my PhD because I wanted to continue into PhD. I was doing it on traffic psychology, which is like, very different in a way from criminal psychology. I was doing on legal topics. I was doing on driver fatigue and legislations regarding professional drivers. And I was very interested early on back in 1996, 97, of combining law and psychology as scientific fields. And like a lot of people, I read John Douglas's Journey into Darkness book, and I started thinking that this would be a very cool job. Of course, everybody of us has seen the Silence of the Lambs and everything, and I started thinking how to combine these two fields. And eventually, just with good luck, Pekka Santila, Professor Santila, who you probably of course remember also, he was starting to do the work at the police academy in Finland at police college, and he had trained by Professor David Cantor in UK. And so I got together with Pekka and we started co-working, and that's how I got into it. But it wasn't a easy way of getting into it because for psychology or legal psychology at the time in Finland, it didn't really exist as a discipline until we started doing it. But I was very lucky in that sense. And then I had a good PhD. I had a very good professor supervising me my PhD. I got funding in the Academy of Finland, so I had my own funding for 6 years. So I was pretty much able to choose what to do within legal psychology, and obviously someone from the National Bureau of Investigation, where I eventually worked for over 10 years. Someone asked us, researchers at Police Academy or college at the time, that does anyone want to come for an internship for the NBI just for a few months? And I said, yeah, definitely, I want to come. And everybody was planning for me to stay there like 4 months, and I ended up staying there for over 10 years, which was obviously very nice. So that's my story of how to get into that business, so to say.
So what exactly does the Finnish National Bureau do, and what did you end up doing for all those years that you were there?
You can't say that they're the Finnish FBI, but they are in charge of investigating violent crimes. And so in terms of homicides, if the local police officers can't solve a homicide in a certain period of time, let's say like a few weeks or months, not to mention years, NBI homicide squad will take charge of that. So they pretty much try to solve difficult to investigate homicides, for example. But they have the National Crime Laboratory where I actually was positioned for the most of the part. And that handles all the cases in Finland. So local police, they have the DNA, they have the, blood pattern analysis, they have the fingerprint analysis, they have everything that a lab has. And that's the only police lab in Finland. So they deal with all the national data and they operate with the local police forces as well, as did I also. So I had some of the cases from the NBI homicide squad, but then in terms of arsons and rapes, for example, I was mainly dealing with the local police officers and departments. And then they have they do all the international job of the police officers of the police in Finland, and as well as financial crimes and drug crimes and organized crime as well.
I mean, I have to ask, and I'm sure our South African viewers will definitely want to know. We sit here in a country that has, I think it's probably like 23,000 murders a year, and not a great solving rate. Off the top of the head, do you know what the sort of annual murder rate in Finland is and what the annual solving rate of those murders is?
I do. We are very different countries, South Africa and Finland. At the time when I was working, up until 2010, 2011, started working at 2002, we used to have about 120 to 140 murders or homicides per year. The solving rate is as high as 98%. So it is very, very high. And nowadays, yeah. I mean, most of them are solved. And the thing is, now it's really we are shifting in trends. Now it's really changing because after 2010, nowadays we only have in Finland we have about 60 homicides per year. So we've come down radically, and the reason for that is what the researchers are thinking that the reason is because a lot of homicides in Finland relate to drinking problems. So a lot of the homicides are between or there used to be a lot of homicides between middle-aged men drinking a lot of alcohol, people who are not in jobs. They've had massive problems in a lot of life areas and so on. And they eventually become so old that we don't see these types of homicides too often anymore. And drugs have come instead and so on. But at the same time, the homicide rate has been going down dramatically. And this is the explanation probably for it. So speaking about it, really, really two different countries. I remember you being at conferences, and I can tell the audience that Gerald, you had all the strangest cases. I remember us international profilers listening to your presentation, and you would go with the mutilation murders and necrophilia and everything, and we would all be like, "No, oh my God, what kind of cases do you have?" And we would be talking about, homicides with only one stab wound or something like that. So I really remember you as a person of having all the strangest cases.
So,
Sure.
so you were mentioning the types of cases, the very low murder rate, which is great. I honestly wish we had such a phenomenal low rate and phenomenal success that you guys have. What would you attribute to the good success on your cases? Is it the kind of cases, like you said, if it's two drunk guys, there's probably going to be witnesses, or it's not maybe difficult, or is it just that you just pour lots of resources into the solving of your cases? Because 98% is a phenomenally high solving rate. I don't know if I've ever heard of another country that has such an amazing solving rate.
Yeah, well, the cases are relatively easy to solve. A lot of the offenders stay at the scene. Uh, we have these, classic cases where people pass out at the scene, and then, someone goes out and talks to other people and so on. So I would say that most of them are easy to solve. And we don't have serial killers in the sense that you have, for example, or that there is in the United States. We've had some serial killers, yeah, of course, but not. And some of them have been difficult to solve ones. But in general, I would say that a majority of the offenders stay at the scene, a majority turn themselves in, and so on.
But of course, if you've got a 98% solving rate, you're not giving people the opportunity to become serial killers. So, that's actually, again, testimony to incredibly good police work. So what would be the kinds of cases where they would contact you, or would you necessarily get contacted about everything, or just certain select cases?
Yeah, just making a remark on what you just said. The average sentence for life sentence in Finland is about 14 years for murder. So, we don't get people in prison for life. So that kind of allows one to become a murderer or a serial murderer.
Wow.
But as said, we don't have many. Well, the cases we opened up old cases at the NBI. So we would regularly, when I was working there, we would reopen cases that have been, unsolved for as long as 40 years. And we would investigate them, looking at them with new technology and looking at it from a kind of like a clear perspective. I was dealing a lot with homicides, rapes, and serial arsons, particularly from the local police. But you do have to remember that I was an academic at the same time. So I was doing a lot of research, although at the same time. So my daily work wasn't only working on cases, it was writing scientific papers and doing research, collecting data. and stuff like that. And although aiding in interviews and all the other stuff that that we do.
Because I mean, that you mentioned your research, and I've always said if there's one person whose publication CV I would kill to have, and I mean that literally, it's yours. I mean, I think it's over 60 publications, and they're all on the coolest topics that you can imagine. I mean, I'm just going to quickly go through some of the ones that I highlighted. I mean, you published on Bruce Springsteen fan behavior identification. Okay, I know that's not forensic. We're going to get to that in a moment. Why do young males attack schools? Intimate partner homicide. Homicide offenders with schizophrenia. A lot about psychopathy. Obviously, that's one of the areas of interest. Psychopaths, female psychopaths, stalking amongst university students in Finland, Finnish sexual homicides, disposal sites for homicides in Finland, bomb threats, stranger rapes, crime scene actions in arson cases, linking of cases. I mean, it literally reads like, I don't think there's a publication listed of a single person that I would envy as much as yours. I mean, you must have had phenomenal access to information.
Sorry, I must have what? An enormous what? I didn't hear you correctly.
Phenomenal access. Sorry, you must have had phenomenal access to information to do this amazing research.
Well, yeah, in Finland you do. I mean, it's relatively easy. I don't think I was giving any, special treatment because of working at the police. In Finland, you get access for research purposes to forensic examination reports, for example, and in Finland, a lot of the homicide cases, when they go to court, they do, at the time they went through a forensic psychiatric examination, which is a very thorough examination in Finland, and they gather a lot of information. So it allows you to collect very, very valid data on both on crime scene behavior and offender characteristics, for example. I was lucky in having a lot of graduate students. I mean, at the university where I was having a research group, they were helping me out. Also with the psychopathy project, I think I eventually published something like 20 papers of the project, and I was co-working with about 14 forensic psychiatrists, some of them very well known internationally as well, on the data collecting and writing the papers. So I had a lot of people working with me in the sense.
I mean, so what you mentioned now is quite interesting, because you said that every homicide offender goes through a very thorough mental health, psychiatric, psychological assessment. In South Africa, the only assessments that any offender would undergo, if there's a query about at the time of the crime there was mental illness involved, and now that he's going to be put on trial, is he currently mentally ill? But there's not this in-depth looking at the individual per se. It's only looking at those two questions. But yours seems like it's a far more in-depth kind of general psychiatric assessment of all of your offenders. What does it sort of normally involve?
By doing that, they try to answer exactly the same question, the criminal responsibility issue at the time of the crime. And it usually involves spending about 2 months at a psychiatric hospital, being evaluated by psychologists and psychiatrists, and their relatives would be interviewed, and doing a lot of measurements and, tests, psychological tests and observations all the time. So it's very throughout. The quality of them in Finland is very, very high. At the time when I was collecting my data covering years 1994 and 2005, I think the homicide data is about, so it's already now very old. But at the time, we would have 500 variables on the data set concerning crime scene behavior and offender characteristics.
Wow. You also mentioned a moment ago that your life sentence is 14 years. So in other words, if you kill someone, you get a life sentence. After 14 years, you're back in society. Is there a high reoffense rate amongst people who have been convicted of that, or is it actually very successful rehabilitation in those 14 years?
The average of the life sentence is around 40 years. We have some offenders who have spent more than that, and obviously some who have spent less. So that's the average figure, average duration of life sentence. And now, well, sorry, your question was? No, forget the whole
The
question.
reoffense rate amongst people?
Honestly, I have to say again, I've done the research. I remember doing the research. I can't remember right now, but I would say that among homicide offenders, it's not too high. We have about, I would say that on 700, I think if I remember not too wrong, but I think on the 700 homicides that there were on the data, I think that something like 45 or 50 had been convicted of homicide earlier on. So it's not too high, I would say.
Okay. All right. And I mean, is there a big emphasis on the rehabilitation side? Because in South African prisons, I mean, there's not much. I mean, there are courses that are developed, like 1-day courses, 2-day courses, for generic courses for offenders. But the majority of the time, they're really just sitting around doing nothing. So I really wouldn't say that rehabilitation is a big thing here. Is that quite different in Finland? The process is really focused on getting this person back into society and addressing their issues.
Well, I would guess that it's more developed, but now we go into an area that I haven't really worked on. I haven't worked prisons. I do know some prison psychologists, but I really can't tell you. I don't know, and I don't want to speculate about it. So
That's fine. You did mention two things that I always find fascinating. The one is arson cases, and that's something we haven't really ever spoken about on the channel. So I'm going to definitely ask you in a moment about one or two interesting arson cases, that if you'd like to just talk about one or two of them, but also about cold cases, because, you know, again, we have such a high unsolved rate that all our cases become cold cases, or like 98 or 88% of our cases become cold cases because they're not solved. Yeah, as I said, we haven't ever really spoken about arson cases. I worked on a couple when I was in the police, just not a lot, but I always found it an absolutely fascinating topic. I mean, from the actual investigation side, which is far more complex than I ever understood, to the mindset of people who commit arson. So as I said, for our viewers, it would be quite interesting to hear maybe one or two of the interesting arson cases that you had to deal with in your career.
okay, I'll give you a story that I wrote about that the book. I collected data on arsons in Finland, and I had about 240 arson cases on the data. And there was a very big arson case in the city of Helsinki at one time, where in an apartment building, 4 arsons, actually 3 were set on that apartment building, and then 1 was set afterwards in another building close by. So obviously, when this happens, the firefighters and the police, they do suspect that someone living at the building set the fire. And they always got the call to the emergency center from one similar person who was living in that building. What made it really out of ordinary was that it was a woman. So she was around 30 years old, I think, at the time. She was a mother of 2 young children, and she eventually every time called the police or the fire department, "Hey, we have a fire here. You should come here," and so on. So she's sentenced, and she goes and does her sentence and so on, and she's freed after about, I think, 3 or 4 years. And I lived in the same street where the fires were set, and I was doing my data with the arson data. And then one evening, I had my boy. He was, I think, he was at around 1 year, 1 year of age at the time. And we had friends over with my husband at the time. And immediately at some point, a friend of us says that, "Hey, can you see from backyard? The garbage bins are on fire." And I'm going like, "What's going on?" And then the, fire department comes, and they, do the thing that they're supposed to do and so on. And next week, a journalist calls me and says that, "Helena, have you heard that the woman who was setting fires on that big building at this same street, she's been released and she's moved to the same street?" And I go like, "Whoops." So it turns out that she had moved just above us. So I realized that a woman who was considered as a very serious arsonist, serial arsonist, had just been released and she's living upstairs from me. This is a crazy story because it just tells you how small the world is. And obviously I couldn't tell too much my husband. I was saying just, let's see for for some days, and if anything happens, and then we move out, because I pretty much had my opinion on how dangerous she could be. So we tried to get, people convinced, because they were on rental agreement, that they really, we need to get rid of them, honestly. And but nothing happened, and the police didn't find evidence against her and everything. And so I think we waited for about a week or two. And when the feeling when you have your things, that valuables that you want to take away if you need to escape and run away for the fire, due to the fire in the middle of the night. And I had my baby sleeping with me, obviously, and everything. I was on maternity leave. so eventually we move out, and afterwards I heard from police officer that they actually got her out of the building eventually. And the next place where they moved, she set a fire at the basement, and she got killed herself on that fire. So she probably got blocked or something like this. But this is like the strangest arson story that I can tell you. And just a general remark of female arsonists, in Finland, about 10% of arsonists are women. They usually have more severe mental health problems than do male arsonists, and usually it's a cry for help. Other than that, the arsonists in Finland, they are often set by lonely, men who have drinking problems. Again, we have the drinking issue here, who might be living with their parents. They set fires in remote areas because they want to watch the fire as long as possible. Or then we have these group of youngsters who do that, and usually on those cases, the fires are set near schools or something like that.
That's interesting, because I know from when I was doing my sort of training, and this was obviously a lot of it's American-based research, and perhaps research with a very sort of loose definition of the word, and that a lot of the arsonists there tended to be insurance-based arsons, setting fire to something to claim the insurance money or to cover up another crime, and very few were really that sort of psychologically driven types of arsonists. But it sounds like with your cases, it's more got to do with the person's own psychological issues, not necessarily this pyromania stuff, but it's just their own loneliness, or etc. So it's quite interesting how it seems that your arsons are quite perhaps different to maybe what you would get in the US.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And pyromania goes along with about 5% of Finnish arsonists fulfill the criteria, because diagnostic criteria is quite strict. So it's not easy to get that diagnosis in a sense. But yes, I would agree that a lot of them are down on emotional reasons. But then again, when we were doing the data analysis of the police investigation reports, one of the variables that we had is motive. And I think, if I remember correctly, about one in three, they can't say what motive they had, because they just don't know themselves either. It was an impulsive, something that I came up with, an idea, I was drunk again and so on. And there was a church, and I thought that, okay, I'll just go and set fire on it. Nothing big will happen. And eventually the church ends up being fired, go out and fire.
Yeah, it's one of those crimes that I think people themselves totally underestimate how dangerous it is, and how, once you set it, you don't have control over it. It has a life of its own. And I've just remember seeing videos of how quickly some things burn, like a Christmas tree. There's videos of Christmas trees where one of the little lights have a short on the Christmas tree, and within 2 seconds, that whole tree is totally engulfed in fire because of the nature of the tree and the sap and the resin. So it's just one of those things that people, I just think, don't really understand how lethal setting fire to something is, and how uncontrollable it is.
Yeah, that's exactly what we moved out in 2 weeks at least. I think that probably be the maximum. I don't remember the exact time, but that would probably be something like a maximum because it was an old Finnish building and in Helsinki, and it had wooden floors, for example. So I was very aware in the sense that if she sets and the fires that she has set before, they were really big. So she wanted to cause a big fire in typically. So that was why one of the reasons why I thought that it is really dangerous to stay here.
Mm. Mm. Now, you also mentioned cold cases. And I mean, I've always found cold cases fascinating. I find old cases fascinating because it's always interesting to see what police were doing 20, 30, 40 or more years ago. And I'm always surprised on one thing is how the basic detective brain is exactly the same as it was 40, 50 years ago. But the technology, of course, is very different to how it was 40, 50 years ago. And there was a book, South African book, published by a guy who eventually became the head of detectives for South Africa, and he published his book back in the early 50s. And it's very difficult to get hold of. And I was amazed by how they solved cases back then. So the cold cases you've dealt with, I mean, which ones stand out as really just interesting for whatever reasons you find it interesting for? I know you sent me some details, and it's literally like a Friday the 13th, one of these horror stories from the 80s in American horror movies, the kids are camping at the lake kind of story, and there's murders. So please tell us about this old case.
Yeah, so 4 teenagers go, hiking in a sense, and what 2 boys, 2 girls, the classic story. Uh, 2 of them are together dating and so on, and everything is beautiful, Finnish lakeside and so on, and having a good time and stuff like that. And it was very innocent at the time as far as we know. And eventually 3 were found killed and 1 injured the next morning, with kind of like different wounds. I mean, blunt force, and then the other one of the girls was also stabbed multiple times. And one of the survivor, he's taken to the hospital. He's being questioned, and everybody is searching for this so-called madman because at time, as you probably know as well, criminal profiling in the sense in terms of police detectives doing that was, thinking that someone who does something like this has to be really crazy in a sense. So everybody was looking for some, odd behaving man in the area or something, killing strangers. And well, then they couldn't solve the case. And back in 2004, the NBI arrested the person who survived from the attack and started questioning him. And actually, the case went to trial. But there wasn't enough evidence to convict him. So he was freed, released. So, it was said that he's not guilty and so on. But there's a lot of interesting elements on that case because for me, for example, I've always been interested on human memory. And he was claiming for total amnesia, pretty much, that he can't remember anything of the incident for 4 days. And his injuries don't, to my opinion, really explain that much of an amnesia. And it's interesting how people describe amnesia, criminal homicide offenders. I've done research on amnesia related to homicides and so on. But that's an example of a case which has been really difficult to solve and still cold in terms of not being convicted. No one has been convicted of it and so on. So that's one of the cases but for me it's interesting because they actually did get some DNA out of the tent after over 40 years. So it proves that never give up in terms of getting technical evidence out of something. And that was also a unique part of it.
I mean, that's interesting because I wanted to know what has changed that typically makes a big difference 20, 30 years later. You mentioned obviously DNA, which wasn't really around, 30 years ago, so to speak, 30, 40 years ago. When the cases were solved, what typically was the kind of stuff that led to a breakthrough? Was it the sciences, or was it somebody remembering something or someone confessing out of guilt after all the years?
Well, I think it depends. It varies. We had another very interesting case, which was 20 years old, and there the person who was eventually convicted, he had given hints to the police during the year, prison personnel, giving details about the homicide, and it was actually I think I've actually consulted you on that case. You remember me asking about causing stab wounds on the victim's eyes? Yeah, I've consulted
Mm.
you.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's on
yeah,
my
I
it's on
remember.
my yeah. So it had the only picture of the victim being stabbed around the eyes area over, I think it was something like 50, 20 stab wounds. And someone at the NBI had come up with the idea that this is somehow related to Asian culture. And I was going around the whole world with Asian colleagues of ours and you as well, and people from other countries, UK and so on, and asking, have you come across this? And one said that it would be related in any way to Asia or anything like that. And eventually,
Mm.
the guy who had been giving hints, he was taken into custody, he was interrogated, and so on. And he was saying after 20 years that it wasn't me, it was my cellmate. So the guy that I was sharing my cell with for other crimes and giving his name, and surprise, surprise, the person had already passed away. So this is how the story goes, you know that. And so what the leading investigator came up with, I liked the idea. He asked me that could you, because it's either one of the two. So could you, Helena, look at their past criminal behavior and see how it corresponds with the cold case and the behavior in the whole case? And it wasn't difficult because I collected all the cases that we had of these persons, and they varied very much on their violent behavior. The one who was eventually then convicted, which was first suspect, his behavior was very violent. He was very impulsive in his violent behavior and so on. Whereas the other one was mainly doing like, thefts and stuff like that, not violent
Mm.
at all, really. And so that eventually led into I analyzed also going to court and me testifying on this issue. And it's pretty much that's I for me that would be in Europe or in Finland, that would be pretty much the only way that I would want to see so to say profiling going into 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 court as evidence.
Mm. Okay. And do you have, and I know in places like the Netherlands, there's a statute of limitations. So, and I think it's 20 years on a murder. So, in other words, if a murder has occurred and we reach a 20-year period thereafter, literally on 20 years and one day, if a person comes forward and makes a confession that he did it, it's too late to prosecute him. And that is one of the reasons why in the Netherlands, as you get close to that 20-year mark, all old cases are reopened, re-looked at forensically. Interviews people are gone back to have interviews to try and make sure that at that last minute in that year leading up to the end of the statute of limitations, is there something that comes in? Because after the 20-year period, you can't do anything about it. Is it something similar in Finland in terms of limitation on cases?
No, not for murder. You can start investigating. You can open up. It doesn't. There's no limitation of years.
Okay, which I've always thought was a strange thing, because I mean, why? I mean, if you've got enough information to prosecute someone, why should the 20-year period be there? It just seems so, prosecutors will only prosecute a case that is winnable. So why do you need to have a cutoff point? That never made sense to me. Yeah, I think you finished off by saying you guys don't have the sort of statute limitations. But what I also wanted to ask you is, obviously there's different systems throughout the world. South Africa, the police are in charge of the investigation. The prosecutor only gets involved once you arrest a person, and then it's the prosecutor's case to take to court, and then you have evidence and cross-examination. So our system is very much like the British system and like the American system. The Dutch system and the French system is very different. What sort of system do you have in Finland? Is it the police are in charge of everything, the prosecutor only gets involved later, or is the prosecutor in charge of the case? And then court-wise, is it the adversarial or sort of that inquisitorial where it's not one side against the other?
Okay. The police is mainly in charge of the investigation. Sometimes the prosecutor works in cooperation with the police already at the investigative phase, like maybe in war crimes or stuff like that, or but not really. I mean, the police is in charge, and then the case goes to the prosecutor, who evaluates the case, and then it goes to trial. When you asked about the limitation time for murder, there isn't a limitation, but there is a limitation for manslaughter, because we differ between manslaughter and murders. Murders require planning or something like that, or extra cruelty in the sense, and it's not always easy to define which one it will be. But anyway, so for manslaughter, 20 years limitation, being able to prosecute. For murder, there isn't a limitation. And when it goes to trial, there's the prosecution. There's we're quite far from the American way of doing trials. I mean, I would say that in Finland, there's the prosecutor, there's the defense, and so on, and they argue based on the evidence and everything like that. But it's not as big as drama as in United States, for example, is. We don't have anything like, the relatives of the victim being heard at the trial or anything like that. It's actually quite a boring scenario in a sense.
And then is it typically like one judge or a magistrate who makes the decision on guilt or innocence, that kind of a situation?
Two to three lay persons, or then there can be a three-judge trial. It can vary. I mean, for example, in the war crime, that's my latest experience, that there was a three trial, and we have low court, then we have court of appeals, and the so-called high court, Supreme Court, in a sense, kind of like comparing to that. Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds not too far off to kind of how we do things here. We also don't have juries, but the system sounds very, very similar. We'll have a judge. Sometimes that judge might have two assessors, as we call them, but they also vote on guilt or innocence in certain high court trials. How would you say profiling's changed? Like when you started, literally you were like one of the pioneers, you and Pekka, starting off the whole idea of, I guess, psychology profiling in police investigations. Where does it kind of sit now? I mean, has it dropped off since you left, or is it still going quite strong that there are people providing this kind of service to the police?
Well, is, but I'm believing that there is one psychologist working at the NBI currently, and a few other psychologists working within the police forces. But I don't think my educated guesswork is that none of them do profiling in the sense that you or I did. So as far as I know, the person working at the NBI as a psychologist, she's doing a lot of threat assessment. So we started doing threat assessment when I was working there with the bomb squad and other police officers on targeted threats and so on. And we had the school shooting cases here as well and so on. But as far as I know, she's mainly doing that, and I'm not sure if she's doing any research-based profiling. As far as I've heard, their answer would be no.
Oh, wow. Okay. I think that's often the sad thing, is that there's often this core group of people who've been doing it for a long time, are very dedicated, but there's not always the organization doesn't necessarily plan for the future very well. And when that person leaves, so much institutional knowledge and way of working kind of disappears, and it's very difficult to recover. And I know from my own experience in the police, our police, if you retire at the good old age of 60, they shake your hand, thank you very much, and off you go into the sunset. But if you resign before retirement, they really don't want anything to do with you. It's almost like they feel very upset and rejected by you, and they don't want anything to do with you. And that often causes the fact that your knowledge completely disappears in the organization. It's not even used to carry on and help groom the next group of people. Is that kind of what happened in your situation? Once you'd left and they hadn't planned for the future so much to have someone take over from you, or be prepared to take over?
Well, yes and no, I would guess. I can't speak on their behalf, obviously, but I think that I think oh, oh, such an academic background would be, fulfill my shoes, so to say, in a sense. Then, and but actually, I took NBI over the years still, and I was really happy. And they were the ones who were calling me to step into the Liberia case 3 years ago, and there the state prosecutor was working very much in cooperation with the NBI, but I think the idea of asking me to be involved came from the NBI, and I still keep in touch with the chief at the time. We're Facebook friends, and we exchange messages sometimes, and it's really nice. And I still have friends working there as head of the violent unit, for example, and I just saw a lot of them at my book launch. And so we keep in touch, and they know my phone number. They know they can anytime send me a request that, Helinä, can you look at this case, and so on. And as said, we're going down with the homicide rate, so it also means that in terms of cold cases in homicides, there's going to be less of them. So obviously not needed there, which I'm okay with.
Yeah, that's a pretty good reason not to be needed, I must admit, and I'd quite happily go for that myself. You mentioned the threat assessment stuff, and I think it seems like a common pattern for profiling units that over the past, say, 15 years, they get more and more involved in threat assessment work, whether it's stalking, bomb threats, whatever. And also the other thing that it seems a lot of units slowly, naturally just get involved in is also terrorism cases. Did you find that was sort of the same for you, where originally the unit started out on murder and rape, etc., the good old-fashioned stuff, and as time went by, it morphed into threat assessment and terror? I mean, if you look at the FBI, they've got the child unit, they've got the adult unit, which were the two originals. Then you had a threat assessment unit, then you had a terrorism unit, and then you had a cyber profiling unit in the BAU. Did you find that you were getting more involved in threat and terrorism cases as your time went by?
Not really. I left before. The threat assessment, yeah. But we didn't really, when I left, we didn't really have terrorist cases in Finland a lot of the time. And we're very low on that in general as well. And also threat assessment. I mean, threat assessment in Finland was very simple. I don't know if you read my paper on bomb threats, but they were very kind of like, very far from what you expect, in a sense that usually a man goes to a bar. I can't remember now, we're talking at the time where people didn't have cell phones and so on. So a man would go into a bar and he would get really drunk, and they would kick him up from there, and he would go to the closest phone booth and call the bar that, hey, there's a bomb in your toilet, and you're gonna explode. And then he probably, in the worst cases, he passing out to the phone booth, and police come and pick him up. So it wasn't very much to do on threat assessment. Nowadays, obviously, things are different. I left before things started getting different. We did have, after the school shootings, we had a lot of, threats at schools by students. And I know that the threat assessment has gone a lot ahead also at the MPH. I'm very happy about. But I left pretty much at the change of that era.
So in the last few minutes, there's three things I want to touch on quickly. The one was the school shootings. I mean, in South Africa, we've never had these sort of attempted mass school shootings. We've had a single person shot, a teacher shot, etc. Kind of in Finland, what's the typical scenario? Is it a student? Is it an ex-student? Is it an outsider? Just off the top of your head, I know I'm not asking you to give all the facts. Then the second thing, of course, I want to talk about is the YouTube channel and the book, and then we'll do some questions and end up. So school shootings, what do they look like in Finland?
Well, typically a young male, anything between 12 to 19 years old. What's critical in them is that they have a subjective experience of being bullied, and the school where they're in the school shooting, it might have been exposed or having a subjective feeling of being bullied at a previous school, for example. But then they do the school shooting at a new school, and this is common for all of the school shootings, both in Finland and abroad as well. So usually coming from experience of not belonging to the community and to other people. And even though, students at these schools, they've said that we didn't notice any bullying or anything like
Mm.
that. And we didn't think that he was bullied, but it's a subjective experience.
Mm.
And that's the main explanation for it, sadly to say. Yeah.
Mm. That's interesting because, the closest we've come to that is it was a final year student at a high school, and he took some swords and knives to school, and he had planned with his friends that they were all going to do something. They all thought he was joking. He wasn't. And of course, when he got to school, he hauls out his sword and kills one kid and injures 3 others. So that's the closest we've come to a mass murder incident at a school. And it was exactly what you say. His perception was, I'm teased, I'm always bullied. But his friends, which he had friends, and classmates and teachers were all like, but we didn't see him as someone who was actually being bullied. So it's interesting, like you said, it's that perception of the world towards me. So that's quite interesting. The YouTube channel, what is it about? And I think we're going to Paul might post the link in the chat. Why did you start it? What is it? What would people get if they go to your YouTube channel?
Okay. Well, due to writing the book, because I had been asked to write a memoir for some time, and I will always said no, it's not the correct time. I don't remember anything. I also said because I wasn't writing a diary or anything at the time when I was working at the NBI. So I had these tiny little police calendars trying to figure out, oh, what happened, and so on. But I was very much enjoying writing the book. I wrote it in only 4 months. It was I had good flow state, and going through all the memories and stuff like that, and talking to people in trying to remember. And then, of course, the publishing company likes me doing a lot of social media thing and stuff like that, which I'm not very used to do that. I'm a bit old fashioned in that sense. But what I try to do with the YouTube channel, for example, that lectures. I taught at the university, at several universities for nearly 20 years. I gave it up about 6 years ago on the last ones. And then I thought that, okay, I might have some knowledge that might be, valuable for people to learn about, for example, in terms of stalking. I do a lot of client work. I advise my clients and so on. So I thought that, okay, it might be something worth doing.
So the YouTube channel is more from an educational kind of point of view. It's not like our channel, which is more sort of true crime for interest's sake. Yours is more of kind of an educational YouTube show. And is the book, for example, a bunch of cases that you worked on, or is it also more aimed at as an educational kind of book?
Okay, yeah, the YouTube channel, that's educational. That's what it's aiming for, and I just started it, so it's very many videos, but I will start doing that more intense in the future. The book it's a memoir book. It's about working at the police for 10 years. It only covers the NBI years, so 10 years is covered of my work, and it's about what's it like to do that work. It has cases that I've been involved with, as far as I can talk about them, because there's confidentiality issues, obviously. But I also did a profile on one cold case for the book. So it's written in the book because I wanted to show how profiling was done when it was done by me. And that it, gives, all kinds of stories of what we were thinking on some occasion, how it was, to work with, internationally. I'm not giving I find at conferences or anything like that. Just as a memoir of what kind of a job it is and how I was doing it, and what all the data shows and stuff like that.
And of course, I think you said at this point in time, it's only available in the Finnish language, but you are looking to have it translated into English, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I've started the negotiations of the translation rights. So I'm hoping to get translation rights for different languages.
And this was literally released about a week or two
And one
ago.
of the
I think
reasons,
it's incredibly new.
yeah, 2 weeks ago. And the thing is, I'm not how much you know about it. I know you also wrote a book, but I don't think there's very many memoirs of people who have actually worked as profilers within the police. We do have the FBI colleagues who have published books of their work and everything. And by doing and writing that book, I also wanted to show people that profiling can be done from an academic perspective as well, but working within the police, because I always valued my possibilities working within the police force. I thought that it's an excellent combination, being an academic and being able to work within the police. And I was very lucky in that sense. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book as well.
Well, definitely wish you the greatest success. And I think if it is a book, like I think I understand you correctly saying, it's a memoir of your involvement in cases. And I think that's so much more interesting for me. And I think that's how my books were written. It was my experience of working on these cases. Because I think anybody can just research a case and write it up. A journalist can do that. An author can do that. But to tell what it's like to be involved, I think it's very nice for people to read. You get the case, but you get that personal insight into the people working on those cases and what it's like for them. So definitely look forward to the English version being released at some time in the future. Oh, okay. I'll perhaps jump into one of the questions. Shelley asks, I have watched a few really good crime series from Finland. If they have such a low crime rate, where do they get their good ideas and plots from? Other countries?
I have no idea. Honestly, I'm sorry. I can't. The thing is, that's one of the things that I tell in the book. I don't watch crime series. I find it work. So I can't really tell because I don't know what she's. Gerard, was it the thing from you that you don't want to spend time?
No, definitely. I don't like
sorry,
to read crime books.
I don't know the answer.
Sorry about that, guys. I am back. I was seeing if we could fix some of the audio issues. I was trying something new there in the background. As you can see, I've also put up the YouTube page there. So please do head over there, guys, and hit the subscribe button, hit like. We're all about linking you to those members of the online true crime community that we connect to as we go through doing the show. Okay, so which question did you jump in on there, Gerard? Because I think we can take
I just asked so I asked about where does Finland get all these great crime shows from and series if they don't actually have crimes? Where do they get the ideas from? So Lena says she doesn't really watch true crime stuff. And as I said, I don't either. I tend not to watch movies about crime or TV shows, although I have watched, the only one I've watched recently is the TV show The Rookie, which was mindless, uniform cop and LAPD type of stuff, which was kind of a mixture of humor and stuff. But in general, as I said, I don't read true crime books and I don't watch true crime series or any other sort of series. There was another interesting question that was asked. Sorry, I just want to see. Oh my goodness, where is it?
Okay, is there any difference? I'm going to jump in there. Is there any difference going back to a cold case in a different police systems? For example, will SAPS detectives and the Finnish police do the same procedures? So we spoke a bit about local true crime cases, or sorry, cold cases rather.
I think so. If I must jump in, I think when we looked at the station strangler cases, which, as we in South Africa know, it's I see it as an unsolved series from the 90s of young boys being raped and murdered in Cape Town. We went back and we looked again at the forensic evidence. Can we reprocess some of the DNA using modern DNA technologies? Because 1994, it was the earliest kind of DNA in the forensics world that was being done. So definitely, I think it's the same that you would go back and focus on a lot of the forensics to see what's new, and re-interview people that might have changed allegiances or on their deathbeds are happy to talk about stuff. Is it kind of the same, I think, Helinä, for you and that side when you go back and look at the cold cases?
I would say so. Yes, pretty much all the same. Yeah.
All right. What is the youngest age at which a person could be diagnosed as a psychopath from Pierre?
Well, if I jump in from here, the youngest age that one would be able to get the diagnosis of psychopathy is 18 years. You have to be an adult to get that diagnosis, and the reason is that we presume and we know that the personality is not finally structured in a sense before you're an adult. So that's why we don't wanna put the diagnosis of psychopathy to anyone younger.
Okay. And I know we've asked this question to Gerard previously, but it'll be interesting to get your take. What is the case that has haunted you the most that you have worked on? From Shelley.
Well, that would be the 40-year-old. That would be the 40-year-old murder case that I mentioned about where the young people went for hiking and so on, because I'm describing it in quite detail in my book, and because the memory description that was given at the trial and other issues that were also spoken about at the trial, that kind of bothers me.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. I mean, it's obviously been a fascinating. I mean, obviously, I've known you for many years, but I still always, every time I talk to you, hear new things and interesting things. So thank you so much for jumping on to our chat and help educate us how things are in other parts of the world. And I definitely envy your crime situation. But again, even if you have a low crime rate, you still have to have good, hard, dedicated cops and good forensics to solve cases. So clearly that's what you guys have up there. So thank you so much for your time. And as I said, I look forward to your book being in English, and I'll definitely get hold of a copy when it is available in English. And thank you so much, and good luck with what you're doing now. Perhaps, I don't know what you're up to now, but good luck. I know you're doing therapy, a lot of therapy with people, but thank you so much in whatever you're doing. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Paul and Gerald. This was so it was really nice to see you both. And good luck with everything that you're doing. Maybe we'll do some co-work in the future as well, Gerald. I'll send you an email of that. I do have some ideas in mind. So
fantastic.
Sounds great.
And also, hopefully we'll be able to get you back sometime soon for a discussion where we can give ourselves, maybe we'll do a non-live, we can do a pre-record where we can just take a little bit of extra time to figure out where the technical glitches are coming from if we need to. Obviously, whilst we're doing the live, when things like that rear their head, we just have to try and deal with them as best we can in the moment. So apologies to the listeners where we've had a few little challenges to get through. Hopefully you have enjoyed the conversation nonetheless, and we will tidy it up a little bit for the rebroadcast for you guys to be able to stream the episode on all the streaming platforms. Thank you, Dr. Helinä. We really appreciate it and hope you'll join us again sometime soon. All right, to Gerard then. Thank you very much as always, Gerard. We'll be back next week. So an interesting one for us tonight. Me being the one that presses all the buttons back here. A little bit of sweating and you got the real pressure. I don't have the pressure. What we can do while you guys are chatting. So I hope you enjoyed the chat while I was stressing in the background. But I think we got through it. And like I say, I will tidy it up a little bit for the rebroadcast. Don't forget that we do have the first episode of South African Serial. So check that out. Hopefully we'll be able to post that for you, the Stuart Vulcan episode, in the next week or so. And but in the meantime, because I'd promised that we would post something, we did put up the last episode of True Crime Room with Derek Reedley, and that covers the Anisha Faniko case. Please do hit the subscribe button. As always, we're just at about 9,500 subscribers. We'd like to get to 10,000 subscribers because then apparently the algorithm starts dishing you, starts kicking into gear even more, and hopefully that will be the case so we can share our stories with a broader and broader audience. You can become a channel member as well. Remember that it does give you exclusive access to some great content that we post on the channel. And just FYI, what we're going to be doing is we'll be releasing the first episode of South African Serial on the Wilken case, and everyone will be able to check it out at the same time. But the episodes after that, what we'll be doing is we'll be releasing those to members a week early. So if you want to check those out from episode 2, then you'll have to join us as a member, and then you'll get early access to some of that content. So those are our plans. What have we got lined up for the next couple of weeks, Jared? What are we looking forward to?
It's a good question. I think we're going to get Kristen Clark back again to discuss a case,
Absolutely.
maybe.
And I think
I'm sure we had stuff lined up that I can't think of the top of my head.
And the Stuart Wilken case, I think, was a great one last week. So we want to, I think, jump onto some really, really, some of the resonant local cases that we haven't covered as yet. So I think that's something that we'll be looking to do. Do, of course, suggest what stories you'd like us to tell. If there are cases you're interested in, profilerafricainfo, all one word, @gmail.com. That's profilerafricainfo@gmail.com. You can just drop us a message. Thank you very much, Jared, as always. We'll be back next week. Thank you to everyone for joining us. If you joined us on the live, and if you're streaming afterwards, we appreciate you. Hit the subscribe button before you bounce, and we'll be back next week. Thanks, Jared. Thank you, everybody. Bye. And don't forget to keep looking over your shoulder.
I am a human being, and I kill human beings.
Before I knew it, I'd fired 4 shots at the door. I kept on shouting for Eva to phone the police.
Tests are underway to determine if a serial killer is on the loose in Centurion, Pretoria.
The dead won't bother you. It's the living you gotta worry about.